There are things that should be left buried in oblivion, forces that should never be invoked by the desperation of a lonely heart. I tell you this as a warning, because Juana's screams still echo in the nightmares of those of us who witnessed her end, and the smell of burning flesh mixed with sulfur never left the streets of our village. But before I reveal the horror we unleashed, you must know how love can turn into the most terrible of curses. My name is Fermin, and at 80 years old, I carry the burden of being the last living witness to a tragedy that began with a simple love ritual and ended up corrupting the soul of an entire village. The elders used to say there are signs that warn when evil approaches: dogs howling without reason, shadows moving against the light, cold that penetrates to the bones in the middle of summer. All these signs were present, but we were too blind to see them. It all started in our village, one of those places forgotten by God, where poverty mingled with the dust of the roads and hope withered under the merciless sun of drought. My compadre Trino owned the only store in town, a good man marked by misfortune since the birth of his son Augustin. The night the boy was born, all the animals in the village went mad. Dogs howled as if they saw the devil, roosters crowed at midnight, and a flock of ravens covered the sky like a black mantle. Augustin was born different. The doctors from the city could never explain exactly what he had, but there was something disturbing about his gaze, as if his eyes saw things that the rest of us couldn't perceive. His mother couldn't bear the situation, and one morning she simply disappeared, leaving behind a strange smell of rotting flowers that persisted for weeks. The neighbors whispered that they had seen her talking to herself in the garden in the days before, pointing to shadows that only she could see. Loneliness began to consume my compadre like a disease. The women in the village rejected him, not only because of the burden that Augustin represented, but because something about his presence disturbed them. Water would inexplicably turn cold when he entered a room, and candles would flicker without any wind. "Compadre," he would tell me while buying supplies, "I feel like something dark is following me, as if my loneliness were a living curse." That's when Senora Julia appeared. Nobody knew exactly where she came from, but with her arrival, the crops began to wither without reason, and birds abandoned the village. She lived in a house on the outskirts, surrounded by silent ravens that watched her with eyes too intelligent to be natural. The air around her house smelled of rotten herbs and sulfur, and at night, strange lights could be seen dancing in her windows. Trino visited her on a moonless night when the stars seemed to have fled from the sky. The ritual they performed that night would change our lives forever. He told me later that while Senora Julia invoked ancient forces, the shadows on the walls took on a life of their own, and an icy wind swept through the room, though doors and windows were closed. When she pronounced Juana's name, the black candles burned with green flames, and a smell of burning flesh invaded the place. Juana was a beautiful woman who carried her own tragedy. Her fiancé had abandoned her years ago, leaving her with a bitterness that seemed to emanate from her like a poisonous perfume. Children cried without reason in her presence, and animals fled when they saw her approach. The spell worked with terrifying efficiency. In less than a month, she and Trino were married. The priest who officiated the ceremony died that same night, his face frozen in an indescribable expression of terror. At first, everything seemed perfect. Juana even developed a special interest in Augustin, but there was something disturbing about the way she looked at him, like a predator studying its prey. The boy began to have terrible nightmares, speaking of a dark woman who visited him at night and left black marks on his bedroom walls. Juana's obsession grew like a malignant cancer. She became possessive to sickening extremes, forbidding Trino to speak with any woman, even to sell in the store. Customers began to stay away, not only because of her erratic behavior, but because they swore they saw shadows moving behind her when she attended, and her reflection in mirrors seemed to move a second after she did. The nights filled with screams and cries. Neighbors whispered about the bruised marks that Trino tried to hide, but no one dared to intervene. The walls of the house began to ooze a black liquid that smelled of death, and strange noises could be heard in the basement during full moon nights. The morning they found Trino dead, a flock of ravens covered the village sky, just as they had the day Augustine was born. The doctor said it was a heart attack, but the body had strange marks that no one could explain. And his eyes reflected a horror that no human being should ever contemplate. Juana inherited the store and transformed it as something that could no longer hide behind a mask of humanity. Her beauty became unnatural. Her eyes acquired a yellowish glow, and her voice seemed to contain echoes of other, deeper voices. The store became a cursed place where products rotted without reason, and money that came from there brought misfortune to whoever touched it. But the worst was yet to come. A putrid smell began to emanate from the house, a stench so terrible that not even the most fragrant flowers could mask it. People heard Augustine's heart-wrenching screams during the night, but fear paralyzed them. When the authorities finally entered, they found the horror. The boy's body was in the basement, chained like an animal, surrounded by symbols painted with blood and melted black candles. The news spread like wildfire in drought season. The villagers, who had lived under the yoke of fear for so long, exploded in collective fury. They dragged Juana out of her house while she screamed curses in languages that no human being should know. In her final moments, she revealed that the love spell had opened a door that should never have been opened, releasing forces that consumed her completely. The flames that devoured Juana that night burned with an unnatural green color, and the smoke formed demonic figures in the air. Her screams weren't human, and some swear that her body twisted in impossible ways as the fire consumed her. Since then, our village has never been the same. The store remains abandoned. The surrounding land refuses to bear fruit. And on moonless nights, some say they hear Augustine's cries mixed with Juana's demented laughter. This story is a warning about the price we pay when we try to force love and play with forces we don't understand. Sometimes loneliness is preferable to the consequences of trying to change destiny. The marks of that terrible night remain not only in our memories, but in the very fabric of our village. They say that on certain nights, when the moon hides its face, you can still hear whispers in ancient tongues coming from the abandoned store and see shadows moving against the light in windows that should be empty. The elders who witnessed those events have mostly passed away now, taking their nightmares to the grave. But I remain, cursed perhaps with longevity, to serve as a warning to those who might be tempted to meddle with forces beyond their understanding. The love that comes from dark magic always demands a price, and that price is usually paid in blood and souls. If this story chilled your blood as much as it chills me to remember it, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more real-life horror stories. Leave in the comments if you've ever heard about love rituals that ended in tragedy in your towns. Remember that there are forces that are better left alone, because once you awaken them, it's impossible to contain them again.